Hey Brian, how are you?
Good to see you, Andrew.
Good to see you too. Um, so welcome to Food Innovators by FoodX. What's going on, man?
There's a lot going on in food innovation here on the West Coast. So I operate out of San Francisco.
Right?
My name is Brian Frank, and I'm a angel investor and advisor in food technology. Um, I had previously spent 20 years in consumer technology, primarily in the mobile space. So I got in early when mobile was really, really hard to do, built a lot of successful companies in that space. Places like Palm, where I was on the first smartphone team there, Adobe, where I did mobile apps and services, and Twitter, where I ran several mobile projects for them. But in between all that opportunity, I've been a successful entrepreneur building startup businesses. And now I'm leaving the mobile space as of last year and turning my attention to what is probably the biggest opportunity for the world and also biggest financial opportunity for us as investors, which is reinventing the food system and helping move that into the 21st century.
Something very, very dear to FoodX's heart. Totally.
Yeah.
You've done. I mean, I've been reading through your bio. You're obviously a FoodX mentor. You've done some amazing things from a business perspective, but you have touched the food space before. This is not
That's
you're
correct.
not just some kind of Silicon Valley tech geek, are you? You've done the food thing before. You've sommelier trained there.
Yes. Trained as a wine expert. I wouldn't consider myself a sommelier. I didn't have my degree,
Okay.
so I want to be deferential to those that have gone through the MS program. But I did spend a year and a half working for Francis Ford Coppola for his restaurant group, training as a wine expert. And in fact, they asked me to actually go and take my MS so that I can continue along that path. And I turned them down to go back into tech. But prior to going back in tech, I spent another year and a half in the food and beverage industry as an advisor to a number of different food and beverage retailers and brands in that space. So I got my hands deep in food, as I like to say, which is always very important. You can't come to an industry and propose to know what their challenges are until you really dig in and see the pain from the inside. And what I saw was an industry that is operates on very low margins, that is trying to produce high quality product at a good price, and has a lot of roadblocks that science and technology can really help them unlock some capabilities to be more profitable, make better food. And so when I was leaving my current tech positions in the mobile space, I realized the intersection of food and technology was really happening. And look, I'll give credit to people like FoodX and a lot of other people that have kind of built up this industry from the ground up to show that there's a lot of opportunity for new entrepreneurship in this emerging space.
Perfect. So I'm going to dig deeper in a second to your kind of how you think technology can help the food space. Mainly because, I mean, there are those of the opinion that what we need is simplicity in food. We need to kind of get back to basics. We need to get back to source, rather than, taking. If anything, the food industry over the last 50 years post World War II, they've been driving towards lowest common denominator of food.
Yep.
And that's really not. And by lowest common denominator, I don't mean simple. I mean, processed and
Industrialized.
widgetized food.
That's right.
High fructose corn syrup in the 70s has decimated our population. Now, I'm not a fist pumping activist. I got to tell you that. But what I am interested in is how you think food and technology can intersect while being cognizant of food needing to get back to the basics, back to the raw, or not raw necessarily, but back to what's good about food and not what's industrialized about food.
That's right. That's right. And I look at the food system as a system. I think of it as key components that are in the way of delivering from the farmer or from even the scientist that's trying to create new and healthier natural products and get them to the consumer. And I look at how can we make that chain as efficient as possible? How can we make the product that comes at the beginning of the process as unadulterated and as natural and as healthy as when it exits to the consumer, either ends up on the plate or ends up at a restaurant. So I am very much in the mindset of, from creation to consumption, let's create healthy, natural, high quality products that can be sold at a reasonable price to every person on the planet, right? And when we get there, It means that we're going to reverse a lot of the big issues that face our world from a health perspective, from an environmental perspective, and for a lot of people that are activists, the ethical implication of our current food system. But I think what you said hits it on the head. We have gone from being an industrialized food producer, cheapest calories at lowest cost, to saying we care about what we put in our body. And I think that's the big trend that we're all trying to kind of adapt to, is the next generation of people that are eating, and even ourselves, are saying, I don't want that processed food. I want something that comes from either the earth or from a natural process. And what I want to say is nature has always, I mean, to steal a quote from Jurassic Park, nature has found a way, right, to help us, and we need to help it, right, at the end of the day. So I look at science and technology as helping us create a better natural product, not to adulterate the natural product. And I'll take it back to first principles. When Mendel was looking at pea plants, and he said, well, if I put these two pea plants next to each other and they crossbreed, I'm going to get a better pea plant, right? And we've been doing things in that way for so long, we've gotten into that mindset, well, let's let nature take its course. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, science has really unlocked a lot of potential in nature. And we see that with a lot of things that we're doing at the farm level. When you talk about the soil microbiome, and when you talk about water conservation and water management, these are all things that are trying to work within the natural process that helps us create better product at the end of the day. Either faster, cheaper, more efficiency for a high quality product at the end of the day. So that's at the very, very early stages. Then we have this whole other aspect of food creation, what I will call it, which is now looking at the processes at a molecular level. And this is what I work on with the IndieBio team in San Francisco, which is how can we accelerate the capabilities of things like fermentation, which is a beautiful process, right? Yeasts are an amazing creature. They eat one substance and spit out another substance. And we've been using this for years to produce things like beer and wine. And we started using this for brewing things like insulin. So insulin can be created through the brewing process. So why can't we create more products through fermentation, which is a natural process, with the proper yeast or bacteria that'll allow us to manipulate the product from one substance to another, just like nature's been doing for many, many years. So that's on the scientific level. And then when you talk about the whole chain of production, you're looking at a lot of inefficient processes and things where science and technology could actually rapidly innovate for these companies. The analogy I give is we're at the car industry of the 1900s, early 1900s. Everything was bespoke. Everything was done by hand, because that was the only way we knew it. Well, Henry Ford came in and he modernized it. He put, a production line on. Then we got mechanization and automation, and all these things helped make better, safer, higher quality cars that could be produced at a much more massive scale. So when we talk about the production line, we're talking about really bringing the modern technology to bear to simplify, provide safety, and provide a cheaper path to market through technology as a service to that platform.
I would kind of home in on one thing you said in particular. I agree that let's say, for example, Ford and the Model T and standardization, you can have any color you want as long as it's black, right? That's where we've been until recently, in my opinion, from a food production perspective. The car industry, however, has realized that you can have quality in mass production. Now,
That's
maybe
right.
Maybe it means some smaller lines and so on, but it's now possible to get a high-quality car that has kind of key components that are standardized, but you are still able to get quality, even though you're leveraging a lot of the benefits of mass production. Does that
That's
make
right.
sense? And I think the food industry is starting to realize that they're literally at that inflection point. They're literally at the inflection point where it's not about throwing in as much kind of inexpensive materials and getting to the lowest priced item and the highest amount of calories. It's now about figuring out how to bring quality back into
That's
the
correct.
equation while leveraging the benefits of mass production.
Well, and it's not just quality. We also have to think about its quality at a level of safety that makes sure that the food coming out of the system is not going to hurt or kill us, right? And I think we're all beset today, by every single day I see an outbreak of some foodborne illness. because of this whole process and because it's become so complex. So when we introduce the elements of science technology to help both simplify mass customization at high quality, we also have to introduce a level of safety that goes above and beyond what we do today. And then I think there's one other element of the product, the sophistication of production that needs to occur, which is the reduction of food waste that comes out of the system because it does not either fit the needs of the production or people aren't willing to pay for it, right? So we have many different challenges: create quality, create safety, and reduce waste. That in every other industry, technology has been able to help kind of solve some of those core elements that are moving the industry forward, that aren't inhibiting the industry, right?
So I've got a real example of all of this. We recently invested in a company called Lotus Scoop, and they produce an orgasmic ice cream. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy good. And for example, not only does she have these kind of weird and wonderful flavors, for example, one of her best selling is kale, banana, and pear. She's got another one which is sweet potato, sea salt, bourbon, and I don't know, something else. One other thing. I asked her how does she get the flavoring of sweet potato in her ice cream. You know, I was thinking she kind of got this little droplet of liquid that she kind of drops in, and that's that instant sweet potato flavoring.
Yep.
And that's what, you know, is inside of most of the ice cream I grew up with. And she said, well, it's quite interesting. She said, I get a sweet potato, I roast it, I peel it, and I put it into the milk, and I blend it.
Yep. And
there's nothing in that ice cream which isn't absolutely from source. I mean, it's real kale, it's real pear, it's real banana, it's real sweet potato.
Yep.
And the difference in taste is intense. I mean, and not only that, but she's sourcing ugly fruit, so it's not perfectly formed peaches and perfectly formed bananas with just the right, you know, 45-degree curve or whatever the hell these, you know, they're doing. She's finding fruit which is, you know, wouldn't pass muster as far as a supermarket is concerned, and she's making the most delicious ice cream, and it has nothing in there which shouldn't be in there.
Right. And that's the great thing about this idea of there is a ton of waste in the system. 33% of all products that go into the system are wasted in some way, either at the farm level or at the consumer level. And she's taking and making a marketplace for that, or making a product that values that at the end of the day. And that's economic and financial gold for venture investors like us, because we're like, there was no market, there was $0 for it. Now we have dollars. Right. So these are the kind of businesses, again, that have to learn to scale because they have to be able to source all the good product. Right. At some point, they have to make that transition from being a home-based business to a small food producer to being a large food producer. But there is now becoming this marketplace of dealing with these excess edible foods that will help her grow. And I looked at 5 or 6 businesses in this space. Y Combinator just invested in 2 of them, in fact, that uses these excess natural high-quality products that aren't good enough to sell or have come out of the system in some way to be reused, and they make really great products. Whether it's ice cream, I've heard of smoothies and juices. I've heard of additives for yogurts, right? You know, so we can get away from artificial sweeteners and additives in yogurts because we're making this new marketplace of excess edible food. So it's a prime example of the system has been failing us because it has been doing things one way, not looking at all the opportunities that exist. When you start looking at how do we make quality, how do we do it safely, and how do we do it at a where it reduces the amount of waste that is in the system or uses waste in a very, very interesting and profitable way, right, at the end of the day, and makes good products for the consumer. We're all in the same business. We all want to make consumers happy, feed them good food. Mm-hmm. And I think, like I talked about, there's one outcropping of doing that, which is good food is the best medicine. So if we do this right, then the food that ends up on someone's plate not only is feeding them and we're making a market for the food, we're reducing the healthcare costs on the outside edge when people aren't getting as sick as much because they're eating healthy and natural foods, right? So you see this lovely chain that everybody wants to get into. And I think where we're stuck, and I think you're probably going to see this as well, and I hope you do, which is the current food producers don't know how to get out of their current way of doing things. They either have to buy their way into this marketplace, or they have to kind of think about radical reinvention, because there's so many natural and healthy companies that are coming in. I look at the fast food industry, right? We have Sweet Greens and we have beefsteak out of DC. We have Lemonade in LA, and there's all these healthy alternative to quick service that are trying to reinvent that model, and are stealing customers away from the big incumbents. And the big incumbents aren't moving as fast as they should into healthy and natural.
So from my point of view, there's one solution to all of this, and it isn't, Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders or any of these folks. It's not academics, and it's not, it's not even necessarily, research scientists or whatever. I think it's entrepreneurs.
That's right.
I think entrepreneurs are going to be the people that tackle the challenges and make these shifts and changes that are necessary in the food industry. Now, the great thing is, I believe the food industry, as it was, the traditional food industry, let's kind of put it like that, I think they recognize that this kind of shift is happening. They understand consumers are becoming more cognizant of what they put in their mouths and aware of where it comes from and so on. They're starting to ask challenging questions. I think the food industry, most of them are knocking on our door. And I'm sure they're knocking on the doors of all of the folks who are involved in food innovation. And they're saying, let's work together. Let's figure this out. Let's figure out how we can innovate, and not just innovate to make money, although that's important, but innovate to create a whole new set of products which are going to be the main products for our marketplace in the next 10 to 15 years.
So I'll go one step further. I will say they actually are eschewing near-term revenue because they know that this line of business will not be significant for them for many years, but they know they need to go in this direction. So I just returned from South by Southwest, where I ran the Future of Food Pavilion, which showcased 12 companies on the cutting edge of food science and technology. And I had several big brands come up to me and say, we know we need to do this. This is not about revenue generation for us in the near term. We know that in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to need to reinvent ourselves to be a more natural and wholesome. I mean, we can point at any single decision right now that's going on. Cage-free eggs in McDonald's, right? They're all going, we have to move in that direction, and the supply chain and the capabilities have to be adapted to build there. Removal of artificial flavorings in a lot of packaged goods. And they all say, we don't have a solution to it today. We don't have a solution actually probably that's even 5 years away. We're probably looking on a 20-year time horizon. Right? But they're all investing and looking at that. They know that they need to be in the healthy and natural food section, so they're all buying companies that build healthy and natural foods to be part of their portfolio. So they're already trying to make significant moves. And I think the fourth thing you see is there has been at least 3 to 5 major packaged good companies that have announced venture funds in the last year. Right? We can all point to Campbell's $125 million venture fund that says we are going to reinvent Campbell's or bring Campbell's into the 21st century by investing in entrepreneurs and early stage businesses, because we know as a corporation, we have our main lines of business, which we need to reinvent anyway, or we need to figure out how they move forward. But we need to bring in radical thinkers, and we need to support them at their early stages before they reach the 10, 20, $50 million in annual revenue, right? Which then it becomes a Campbell's line of business, right, at that point. So I think we're seeing the motivations, we're seeing the moves. I think that also there is this groundswell of, at least from Silicon Valley's perspective, of we have knowledge here in Silicon Valley to bring to bear from a science and technologist perspective. We see it in New York with FoodX and with Excel Foods and a lot of the things that are going on the East Coast as well, Branch Foods in Boston. So I think there's now these enclaves, both in corporate and in independent, that are now going to start the evolution. And I paint the picture to everybody. We're still very early on, right? Because we're going to see a lot of failures just as much as we're going to see successes. And I don't think the food industry has ever really adapted to the entrepreneurial model, right? Which is a lot of bets, some that are big, some that are good, and some that fail. And we're starting to see that momentum into that type of lifestyle of businesses in the food industry, which is very exciting.
I mean, the good thing about America is failure is not a black mark. It's never trying to target something that's considered unreachable and missing and failing is not in America considered a black mark. In Europe,
That's right.
In Europe, it's culturally a negative. Here,
Mm-hmm.
it's actually a positive. So
Yep.
I think that's a good thing. A couple of things I'd come back on. Where I see them going is not a range of products which are natural, which kind of create this alternative product set, as much as there needs to be, and I think there is, a movement towards food which is better, natural, better sourced, etc., but also has the taste characteristics and the pleasure, the mouth pleasure that you get from the bad stuff. So it can't be this kind of aisle in the middle of a supermarket, which is suddenly sort of granola and natural products, and yet around that one aisle you've got all the other shit that has been there for the last 50 years. What they need to figure out, and I know they're working on it because I get into these conversations with them, is products which get the best of both worlds. They taste great, they look great, they last. Maybe they don't last quite as long. I mean, when I used to buy a loaf of bread in Germany, it would go off after 2 days. But damn, was it tasty in those 2 days. In America, you have a loaf of bread; it could sit on the counter for 3 or 4 weeks, and it looks like it did when the day you bought it.
Yeah,
which is scary as hell. So anyway, so I think we're not looking ultimately for a range of natural products as much as we are that all products are better, healthier, and also tasty and give the mouth pleasure that the bad stuff does.
Right. And I think what you're touching on is really important, which is, and again, you're touching on a systematic issue that we also need to address, which is most consumers in America don't go and buy their food like you do in Germany or France or any other place in the world where you go practically almost every day, pick up fresh foods, eat them very quickly, right? The interesting thing is that we've gone to like weeks or 2 weeks or a month shopping schedule, which means that we need to have products that sit on our shelves for a very long time. But what's happened now in the interim is the on-demand economy, right? So now I can call up from my phone and I can get a fresh product delivered to my door in an hour or less. Yep. And so now we have the ability to go back to fresh products. And it doesn't take a supermarket with 50,000 SKUs to service me once a month. I can have great product on a daily basis brought to my door if I wanted to. Or, a lot of the products I look at is how do we make eating or healthy food accessible at all areas along your time of day, right? From the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, how can you find good food wherever you are? Because we don't need to relegate it anymore to these little windows of our day when we need to get calories, right? And that's where convenience stores and fast food lived, was I had a very small window of time that I had to eat, right? But now when good food can be everywhere at a push of a button, the opportunity exists now to put good food in people's hands. So I think that's what you're seeing in terms of the attitude and kind of the trend shifting that will allow us to put those good foods. But let me go back to what you said, which was there's a need for this high quality food that tastes great, that is not the junk food that we know today, right? And it's funny. You and I, we have the luxury of eating good food because we make good money and things like that. When you eat a really good quality carrot, right, and it's sweet and it's delicious, or it's roasted well, right, you go, holy crap, that's as good as any candy I can go pick up and eat, right? And so we have to figure out how to bridge the gap between the production of high quality product, remove all of the constraints and issues with producing that, and bring that to the consumer as quickly and as fast as possible. And again, when you say technology takes some of this, the processing or the intermediate steps out, going from farm to table is a movement that has been enabled by the fact that we all have these smartphones in our pocket, that we have an internet browser, that we can look at all this great produce, or that we can walk into a retail establishment that has farm fresh products, or a farmer's market that's local. So how do we create more of those economically viable small systems that not only connect you to your food, connect you to your community that grows it in the most simplest and easiest manner for the lowest cost, right? And so I'm seeing a lot of companies that are being built that go, look, I have all this great produce. I don't want to go through the factory production. I don't want to go through the traditional retail chain. I want to get it to a home consumer or to a restaurant that will do the most simple production. And then I even go one step farther, which is, personally, I'm really excited about the idea, once that carrot hits the home, how can I make that person at the home cook that carrot in the way that would produce the most nutrients and delicious product? Right. So I invested in a company that does sous vide because I think sous vide is an incredibly easy and best way to cook a lot of products where you retain the flavor with the littlest effort and you give home chefs the superpower to create great food. I mean, like, look, when I've cooked sous vide and I've had a piece of meat out of it or a perfectly poached egg or even vegetables, people go, that's probably some of the best product I've ever tasted. Right. And when we give people those superpowers, we can unlock the potential in these healthy, natural ingredients without requiring a whole lot of manipulation.
So
right.
And in terms of that sous vide, that's Nomiku?
Nomiku, exactly, out of San Francisco here.
Okay, cool. I know, fabulous product, great people. I mean, it's a really interesting company product and so on. And I think that's an interesting dimension, which is, we've talked a lot about food and about how food is going to revolutionize, and the demand for good food is going to revolutionize the food industry. But I think the other dimension to it is the people that are coming up, and the kind of, as we said before, the entrepreneurs, the food founders, the people who are thinking about food in a different way, and also who are more in touch potentially with the shifting tastes and needs and demands of the consumer.
Yep.
So ultimately, when these larger companies that, whether we like it or not, control the distribution channels and so on, or at least have a significant lock on the distribution channels, when they acquire these companies or invest in these young, innovative companies, it's going to be interesting to see whether they try and standardize and push them down to the lowest costs, etc., and do what they've been doing for decades, or whether they allow those products, those new brands, and those new food leaders to try a different way, a more innovative way. It's going to be interesting to see whether they'll be able to bring them in without killing what made them special in the first place.
That's right. And I think we're going to see a lot of, and this is true of any mergers in any industry, we see a lot of pain with mergers or acquisitions, and we see a lot of misunderstanding of how these people are meant to help that company innovate, and it becomes a line of business, right, at the end of the day, and they judge it based on, and sous vide is a good example. There's a good number of 5 to 10 different sous vides on the market. KitchenAid, Breville, these guys don't have that in their kit. So at some point, I fully expect these guys to wake up and go, oh, you know what, sous vide is the new cooking method. Why don't I acquire someone in, put it under my brand, which has a lot of customer appeal, but they won't really elevate the market. But a good example of that was the acquisition of the Keurig systems by Green Mountain Coffee, right? But Green Mountain said, look, the hardware device was our thin end of the spear. It's a way to put our consumables in every home and office. Yeah. And when you look at their revenue model, 15% of the revenue comes from the hardware. 85% comes from the consumables, right? So every single manufacturer of equipment and retailer that I know has been asking me, how do we become the Keurig for X? Or how do we take advantage of the fact that these innovative companies have created a new model that is verticalized rather than horizontal and portfolio based, right? And when you verticalize, now you have this lock-in of a repeat customer coming back and buying a subscription or buying an on-demand product that is locked in. I mean, you heard in the background of my house, we have an espresso machine and we make pods of coffee, right? And the idea of the convenience, the quality for a relatively low cost, I appreciate that. And I think that these bigger businesses have to learn to adapt their business models to the new taste and dimensions that we're looking at. So I get, and I'm sure you get hit up with a ton of pitches, Keurig for X, right? And while it's a great business model, you have to understand how you scale that as a logistics business, because I don't know any hardware business yet other than Keurig and Nespresso that have learned how to build the economics for a consumable layer inside of there. And it's very challenging. And like you said, a lot of businesses are being built around logistics of food transportation and food delivery. Those are hard businesses to build. And I think we're going to see a lot more failures than successes in the near term, but the ones that are going to be successes are going to be huge because we know we need good food in the home, or we know we need this capability, and we are trying to find ways to make it scalable where the margins for the product work out. So to put a fine point on it, when I look at a company that goes, I want to buy in a company or acquire someone, I think they have to first ask themselves, can they foster the innovation in the right way that will allow them to make a successful business along the whole value chain rather than just an individual line of business? Because an individual line of business is good, but it won't create you hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars of return, at the end of the day. And the companies that do those acquisitions and then realize, a good example from the early days in the mobile space was Android acquisition from Google. It's probably the cheapest, most valuable business Google has ever acquired because they realized if they owned the core element of the mobile operating system, they can deeply tie all of their services that make them a ton of money. And I think that the food business is going to have its Android day. That's my bet, and I know that's your bet, which is we find those companies that allow these big companies to accelerate their business along a very verticalized axis from the raw experience that people love to a very, very big opportunity to sell consumable products or hardware or services that can be amortized through advertising or through some other means. And I think we're on the cusp. And I think that's why you, I, and several other people are betting on this space, is because we know that business is going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually betting on the entrepreneurs rather than on the space. It's the people.
Well, you have to have them, right? At the end of the day, you have to have them innovating at those elements. Like we needed a Keurig to show us that business model, and we needed each of these entrepreneurs that came up. And Nomiku is a good example. Lisa is a hustler. Oh, yeah. She built 2 very successful Kickstarter campaigns, one that raised over $500,000, one that raised over $700,000, in addition to also selling online. And now she's on the cusp of producing her first cookbook that will help popularize sous vide. And she's trying right now in beta a delivery service for frozen meals that you can drop right in your sous vide.
But good frozen meals.
But great frozen meals, not just good. Super tasty frozen meals.
From chefs who are it's like getting the chef's food delivered to you. It's a really interesting model.
Exactly. So we need her innovating at the very, very early stages, and then we need to layer capabilities, capital, and people in the food industry on top of these. I think that's the biggest opportunity for me right now is putting a technologist or a scientist in the room with a food expert. Because I think a lot of times we come at it and go, we know the problem as technologists here in Silicon Valley, and we don't address the real need for food. When you get the food people in the room, they bring a huge perspective and industry knowledge that says, well, no, here's how you build craveable, desirable, marketable products to a wide range of consumers. So I bet on the entrepreneurs. I bet on the industry coming to the table with the right capabilities. Yeah. And I think places like FoodX, places like now Sonoma Brands in Sonoma, they're bringing food people to bear in the right mentorship and advisorship way that gives these people, again, that accelerates these people, the entrepreneurs.
Interestingly enough, we're getting reach outs from many, when I say many, I mean 10 plus multi-billion-dollar food companies who are saying, hey, can you potentially help us, connect us with interesting entrepreneurs, with interesting technologies, with interesting products, and can you help us potentially go through a cultural shift? Help us to work with us, go through get engaged with FoodX, and go through a cultural shift within our own organization. It's almost like they're looking at this. This movement of accelerators, incubators, food leaders, and so on, as a way of not resurrecting, but re-energizing their organization.
Yeah.
And making them maybe see things differently, do things differently, and so on. Now, our challenge is figuring out who means it, and then who's actually going to live it once they've started the process of change, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I say I think we're in early days. I think this is still an evolving marketplace. How the corporations play in it is still yet to be determined. They clearly want to bring capital to bear. That's been announced and that's been declared. They're clearly hitting your door. They're clearly hitting my door and a number of people's doors saying, we need to figure this out. Can you help us, either Silicon Valley or the food industry? And I think the story's yet to be written. of the value that they bring. I mean, I will tell you, there are people that I believe will be the innovators in the industrial sector. And you can look at people like Jeff Dunn at formerly Bolthouse Farms, now Campbell's, who are really trying to push the industry forward significantly. But there are people that are like, hey, I just have this momentum to get fresh and natural food. I have an objective in my industry to do this, and then want to use us as a vehicle to just prove that they know what fresh and natural, what modern technology can bring to bear, but really won't help us move the industry forward. So I think we're in a vetting period right now, both on the entrepreneurial side, who are the entrepreneurs that are going to win, and who are the corporations that really will put their time, energy, and money where their mouth is.
I see what you're saying. It's like there are those companies who are saying, okay, let's figure out how we can get an organic label on this, or how we can get a non-GMO label on this, when what they really ought to be thinking about is, how do we make this product better?
Exactly. Or how do we reinvent our processes, right? At the end of the day, like, it's not just someone from a strategic initiatives part of the corp saying, well, we're just going to slap a label on the bag. It's really getting R&D, the production teams, the whole company to recognize that there are value adds that bringing some of the stuff that the entrepreneurs are doing to bear on their system. I think they're starting to listen, but I also think that, much like Tesla has reinvented electric vehicles, there's going to need to be some breakout successes that don't follow the conventional schemes and don't go through industry, right? And don't go through the conventional means. I mean, I'm starting to see a lot of these Elon Musk types that are like, we can't wait for the corporates to wake up to these revolutions. We're going to have to create them ourselves. I mean, a good example of that is Josh Tetrick at Hampton Creek. He's like, I could never have done what I'm doing inside at a big company, right? It would have taken me 5 times as long and 10 times as much money, and I would have had to convince people it's the right thing to do. He's like, I'd rather do it on the back of venture capital to get started, prove that the product demand is there, and he's done that. And now he's moving into a sales and marketing model, which is selling a ton of product, right? And then Hellman's and those Best Foods, they wake up and they go, oh my gosh, we're missing this market or this opportunity. Some lash out, some fight back in the wrong ways, and some fight in the right ways, which is they try and help these innovators, right? They try and figure out how they can participate in this new market.
So I think those kind of outliers who are prepared to kind of do things differently are important in terms of showing the way.
That's right.
But I don't think they're ever going to create an alternative system or an alternative kind of way of doing business to the side of the core. In other words, what really needs to happen is the core needs to go through that challenging, interesting, innovative, painful, potentially costly at times, failures and successes type of process. And by using those kind of outliers as a guide, because when I talk to people within this kind of food activists side of things, it's almost like they're proposing there needs to be a whole new separate ecosystem that does it right. And I think that's just not a feasible solution. What it needs to be is it needs to be from the inside out, and maybe some of those outliers can be a good example, but they're an example of what the Borg or the majority, however you want to think about it, needs to kind of go through a significant transition that the whole entity needs to go through.
Yeah, I think because food has become systematic or systematized, that's definitely true as it exists today. The large manufacturers and the big commercial industry will have to go through this shift because there's so much riding on it from a revenue perspective for them, but also from if the trends are shifting and they cannot adapt, people will find alternatives, and the alternatives will start to grow. So I think that you're absolutely right. But again, I'll point at, I think we're still at the formative stages of this whole industry because we see these innovators kind of pushing the boundaries. They can serve as as signposts. But I also think that there's going to be space for a lot of alternatives in the market, or disruptors in the market. And this is true of any industry. No industry can stay stagnant forever. And no industry, the same players that are in business today are not necessarily going to be the same players that are in business 10 or 20 years from now. Again, I'll go back to an industry I know. If I was to say that 10 years ago in the mobile industry, Nokia would still be in business. Right? Nokia would exist. Nokia was the biggest. They could move 1 million boxes a day. That was their high point. Was they were selling 350 million phones a year. So 1 million. They moved more packages than FedEx did. They said, I believe was their quote, FedEx or UPS a day. They moved more boxes. And what they failed to do was adapt to the new market conditions, and they lost momentum. Now, another major industry player, Apple, decided that they would pick up on that. So I think that there's opportunity for disruption. We're starting to see some potentially $1 billion, and some of these companies are raising money at $1 billion valuations right now. So we're starting to see that. But I think you're right. I don't think we've seen the exits yet that point that the disruptors will be the next PepsiCo, Unilever, you name it, right? We still have a lot of hopes that the big companies will find ways to adapt the new technology or adapt the new methods of making products or doing things, and that will shift their production. I think the mid-tier guys will have a lot of problem, right? Because they don't have the revenues to keep going and to figure it out. But the big guys are definitely, and that's why, $125 million from Campbell's is not an insignificant bet, right? Because right, and they're betting on billions in returns from that $125 million bet, right? So I think we're starting to see it.
So a couple of things are happening within from an infrastructure perspective that is making this whole thing more open and more opportunistic and available. So, for example, Whole Foods. Whole Foods has been great at finding and cultivating new products, new brands, young companies, and so on. They've got a very proactive approach to innovation and new products. I'm seeing them as a good channel for, and admittedly they make decisions quickly in terms of whether a product is working or whether it isn't. But they're giving new products and new founders and young companies a chance.
That's right.
It's not like, if you're not from Pepsi or if you're not from whichever company, I'm not going to try you. They are opening up the channel to the kind of innovators, which is fantastic. And I think the other retailer, the other kind of grocery and retailers will follow suit over time. The other thing is, as you say, the models are changing. So in other words, food is going more direct. So those channels are not as important today as they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And in 10 years' time or 5 years' time, maybe the footprint of grocery will be fundamentally different than it is today, and there'll be a whole different infrastructural way of getting food to people's doors, to people's tables.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you read the report. I think it came out last week or the week before about how successful Amazon Prime has been in terms of food delivery and disrupting the traditional marketplace, right? The traditional retail marketplace. Some could say, honestly, that Amazon Prime has already won in the markets where they deliver, because the number of millennial shoppers that are now using those is actually pretty significant. It's not a 1 or 2% number, right, anymore. Like, it wasn't worrisome when it was a couple fringe people using it, and that was the way they got the vegetables. But now Amazon Prime in the markets that they operate is becoming a significant player. And the same way that Whole Foods, I think, is partnered with Instacart, right? They are seeing that they need to move their brand and their distribution of their products forward with the technology providers in tow. Now, again, whether Whole Foods decides that owning Instacart is in their best interest or not, we don't know. But we see a fundamental shift in the way that these people are running their businesses. And again, to put a fine point on it, adapt or die, right? Because the way that things are happening, they're happening so fast that the big companies that learn to adapt, like a Whole Foods, will find ways of either working with the technology or building their own, or buying it in, right? Which is another fine way of getting into the game. And then there will be these disruptors like an Amazon Prime that will say, look, we don't have a need for the ecosystem that exists because we're using the infrastructure that we've already built, our trucks, right, that are going to go around the city. And now we just need to work on the sourcing. Right. And again, if Amazon can go to the same people that buy product for Whole Foods buys product for, and the guys go, well, either I make more money or I can sell to both. Right. it's good for everybody, right? It gives them competition. It gives the suppliers a channel for their product, and ultimately the consumers win, right? And that's what we're all about. We're all about the consumers winning in this marketplace. And we want to find a way that Whole Foods can do that because they are a big institutional brand that everybody knows, that people trust. And then we have these kind of emerging players that will make a disruptive change that, again, from a cost perspective might be better, but they have established the brand or equity in the consumer mind. So I think we have to look at both sides of the house and then kind of figure out how those combine kind of as we move forward in the future.
So I could literally spend hours talking to you. I really appreciate your time. Why don't we kind of just step back from the ledge slightly? You're an angel investor.
Yep.
You're obviously fascinated and completely crazy knowledgeable about the food industry and technology and so on.
Thank you.
But as an angel investor, what are you excited about? What are you looking for? What do you have your eyes open for in the marketplace? In other words, if I'm a food founder and I'm looking for someone to get behind me, what should I be talking to you about if I'm trying to get your attention?
That's a great question, because I'm going to be a lot different than your traditional technology investor. I don't just look at digital solutions. I look at a lot of physical solutions as well. And I'm going to be a lot different than your traditional food investor that I think looks at successful food businesses, things that are traditionally formulations that can be put on a store shelf. So those are areas that I don't play in, things that are pure technology or pure food. Where I play is at the intersection of science and technology as it is applied to food. So the things that get me very excited right now are things that are around scientific breakthroughs that unlock natural capabilities. Like I said, fermentation as a platform for creating very interesting food products or manipulating food products in a natural way is becoming more and more of a trend. We are seeing meats grown in bioreactors. We are seeing egg whites and gelatins and any number of different products. We see algae and bacteria as food sources that are now becoming potentials for high quality nutritious things that exist in nature that we now just need to grow sustainably and reliably. That's one big area, which is all these scientific breakthroughs that unlock new and natural foods. The second thing is bringing food closer to the people that need it. And this goes along with fermentation, is I can't drop a big farm in the middle of New York City, but could I drop a fermenter? Or could I put a rooftop garden? Or could I put freight farms? Could I put the means of production so close to people that we cut the carbon costs and the transportation and the management and the manipulation so that a head of lettuce is unadulterated from these farms into a grocery store or into someone's home, right? So changing the model for food production is very exciting for me. And it means that places that were food deserts or places where it's very hard to traditionally grow food, we don't have to fly it over or truck it over. I mean, look, you live in New York City. You don't live like me next to the salad bowl of the country in Salinas and the Central Valley. I get amazing fresh produce. Now, you got Hudson Valley, and that's great.
I actually live in Princeton, so I live in
Princeton.
I live in the Garden State.
You live in the Garden State, so you have New Jersey, which buffers that. But you have Aero Gardens now that's being built in Aero Farms, which is being built in New Jersey to supply food to major metros.
We've got Gotham Farms in New York. We've got Eden Works. We've got all sorts of different interesting guys doing some great
super exciting, and I don't think it 100% replaces traditional farming. Let me be clear. Sure. The traditional farming still has a huge value into our ecosystem, and the people that do that know the products better than anybody else. What I'm saying is it changes the economics for certain products and for certain situations where we can apply food as a service inside of a city or near a major metro, or even better in sub-Saharan Africa or places where food production is really, really hard because of climate changing conditions with access to water and things like that.
So you're interested in the intersection of food and science.
Yep.
Of bringing food and technology together to make it more closer to the market.
That's right. I'm interested in the revolution around food management. So in terms of safely protecting our products as they go through food production. So cold chain management and pathogen introduction, right? Those are two things that are both big issues right now because of the Chipotle issue and several other, kind of supply chain related issues where, again, we have detection and monitoring equipment that buffer the human capabilities, right? That give us a better fine-grained view of what's happening to our food as it goes through the production, as it goes through the distribution, as it goes through logistics, so that we don't have to introduce pathogens. So, for example, I work with a company here in the Bay Area called Six Sensor Labs. And Six Sensor Labs is very interesting. They produce a handheld detector for allergens today, but the tests that they use are chemical-based, and there's nothing stopping them from innovating into pathogens. And could you imagine, instead of sending off food product to a lab for it to get tested off-site and to be certified, on the line they're testing constantly for pathogen introduction or allergen introduction, right?
So I have to offline talk to you about a company we've just backed called Fresh Surety. Basic concept is it was a research project out of the military that they've adapted. They were involved in that project. They now own the patents and so on. But what it can literally do is it can test not only location, temperatures, and so on from the beginning of the supply chain all the way through to the consumer. But it can tell, based on the gases being released in a carton, whether that carton has a 7-day shelf life, a 3-day shelf life, a 5-day shelf life, and so on. So, for example, when Amazon received their truck filled with strawberries, they not only know whether that truck is good, but every single package in that truck, whether it's bad, whether it's been damaged, whether it has some form of E. coli or some other form of challenge.
That's right.
And whether it's got a 7-day shelf life. In other words, if Amazon ship it out to somebody, whether it's going to be bad when it arrives or be bad after a couple of days when it arrives. It knows whether it's a 7-day shelf life or a 3-day shelf life. It's pretty insane.
And they're exactly trying to solve problems at every point of issue within the distribution chain, right? And that's the challenge, is getting technology and getting these services or capabilities, both from a hardware, from a software, and from a monitoring perspective, into those. So sensing is a big area for me. Sensing and monitoring. Automation, obviously. Industrial and commercial automation is coming. We're starting to see the inklings of robotics and automation that will help us process food less, but get good food on the table. And a lot of these things I see right now in the commercial space, but I think that industrial robotics is going to be a big thing. And there are things like Beastrobot and T-Bot, and I just looked at a salad-making robot, and Eats, a restaurant chain here in San Francisco, is automating their back end for creating quinoa bowls. There's a number of different robotics and automation systems that are basically helping us make higher quality products at a mass customized level. So automation and robotics are very interesting for me. Software and services for the restaurant industry are very exciting because, as we know, restaurants are very, very hard businesses to run. And 60% of their costs are variable from food and human capital. And we've never really brought to bear technology to help manage and monitor those costs, both the stuff coming in the door, whether it's people or food, but also the stuff going out of the door in terms of waste. I mean, when you think about it, 30% of the products that's wasted out of restaurants is money that could have been made to help them be more profitable. How do we reduce or repurpose the waste in that system? So restaurants, waste management across the whole systems are very interesting for me because I think we're finding money. There's a company that YC backed that just came out yesterday called Copia, which actually reclaims food from commercial kitchens and puts it into food banks and homeless shelters. And what they trade on, their value is on tax credit, right? Which is automating the system to account for all the food that you're giving away, and then to automate the application for that tax credit, and then they take a big chunk of that because that's found money. You would have had to apply an accountant and someone to manage that from a restaurant perspective, and they've now taken that whole hassle and delivered it to you as a service. It's pretty amazing in terms of finding money in the system and finding value in the system where there was none. So that whole food waste, both industrial and commercial as well. And then the final two areas that I'm most interested are really consumer focused. One is about the home kitchen. So Michael Pollan has said that home cooking is linked to better health. Agreed. That if we cook at home more, we will have better health, because when French fries are really easy to get outside, we eat them a lot and they're not actually that good for us. We should not be eating them a lot. But because they're hard to make at home, we don't eat them as often, right? And the things that are easy to make at home are fresh and natural and simple, right? We don't need to do a lot to good product. So I want to give everybody the superpowers in the kitchen that make them a Bobby Flay or that make them a Dan Barber, right, at the end of the day. And how can we make them less scared and more capable so that they are doing it more? So that's why I've invested in smart home technology. In fact, a lot of people call me the gadget guy here in San Francisco because I don't think there's a single smart home product that hasn't gone through me at some point. And I actually run an event in Seattle with a guy by the name of Michael Wolf called the Smart Kitchen Summit, where we actually show off and talk about all the innovation in the smart kitchen sector. And I think that that's very critical. We need a better kitchen setup. And then the last thing, which is a very, very far off thing for me, which I think is just I'm starting to see the inklings of, is what I call the personalized diet. You and I eat different things. Our bodies metabolize things differently. In fact, you may be more active than me. You may be a cyclist. I may be a couch potato, right? And so for our tendencies, there are things that are going to be better for our health to eat at any given point in our life based on our activity, based on our conditions. And we're just starting to unlock all the key data that allows us to think about that. So the three pieces of data that I think come to bear is the artifacts in our ecosystem right now. Yep. I have on my credit card all my Whole Food shopping lists, right? What I buy on a daily basis. And that needs to be quantified. Is it good for me or not, right? And one of the big things about making a behavior change for consumers is change the environment. Put good product in their pathway that tastes good, and they will buy it and then fill their refrigerator. So using the artifacts to know what I eat and helping shape what I purchase. The second thing is sensing equipment. We all carry around a smartphone these days. Yep. These things know how much we move. They know our location. They know what we need to get into our body and what we need. We're all wearing smartwatches in some way. So the sensing is starting to happen to get us data. And then the final thing I think that needs to unlock is the microbiome or the DNA sequencing that says, well, for your condition, for where you are in your life or for what your body can process, these are the nutrients that we think you need to up. These are the things we need to down. And I don't know about you. I go yearly for a physical. That's not nearly enough. I should be doing a physical every other day because every single day, the things that I need are changing based on my situation. So this whole concept of a personalized diet, we eat what we need and we get the right nutrients is really, really exciting. So I know we're running short on time. I wanted to get that one in because I think that that's a big deal.
So where if people have the kind of industry killer, sector killer, product killer for any of these particular areas, where do they find you, reach out to you, connect with you? Social media, web, email, I don't know, whatever you're comfortable.
Yeah. So number one way is social media. I'm very active on Twitter, and I can be found at BFrank, BFRANK. Very easy. Be frank with me. Send me ideas. I get a ton of pitches over Twitter and DMs all the time, and happy, and I always respond. So that's the number one channel. The second channel I would say is don't come at me directly. I think the most valuable thing for any entrepreneur is to figure out how to get warm intros to people like me, yourself, because I get tons of just open cold calls and I have to sift through a ton of them, and they're generally low value. If someone in my network is willing to vouch for you or give you kind of cred to get to me, that means you're already one step ahead of the game, and it already means you're going to get a reply from me. So FoodX obviously is a great way to get hold of me. I work with you. I work with the FoodX program. I work with a ton of venture capitalists in the Bay Area and in New York City. Yep. So inevitably, if you can get to any venture capitalist, you can usually get to me. I have a pretty good network in that space. And then finally, a lot more food innovators in the sector are getting to know me, whether it's corporate or whether it's sorry about that. I got a call while we were talking. So Twitter, warm intro, get to me. You'll be able to find me if you're a hustler.
So basically, if people want to talk to you, they should talk to me.
Yeah.
And if people want to talk to me, they should talk to you, right?
That's right. Warm intros. They always help.
That's not at all circular.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
Brian,
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you for the time today. You
Appreciate it.
I really want to do this again. It's almost like I want to set up these things weekly, but I think I don't know. I think you'd get sick of me pretty quickly. So let's do this again in 3-4 months' time and figure out where you're at with your investments, where you're at with your decisions around angel investing and so on. And if you have any new news, let us know, and I'll let the people know.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Have a great day.
Have a great day. See ya.
Bye-bye.